Welcome to another episode of Stuck in My Mind podcast. I'm your host, Wize, and my next guest is a trailblazer in the field of creativity and well-being. Welcome to the show, Tasha Golden. Hello.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure's all mine. I'm excited to have you on. Really, I was reading your profile. You're doing some amazing work, so I'm excited.
Thank you.
Okay, so can you share your journey from being a singer-songwriter to becoming a public health scientist?
Yeah, you mean that's not like the typical trajectory, like you.
No, no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah, that definitely was not the plan for me. I would have never imagined myself being any kind of scientist, but life's paths
Ab-
are not necessarily the way that we plan them. Yeah, the job that I dreamt of doing since I was a little girl was being a singer-songwriter. I wanted to travel the world and write songs and play them for audiences. And I got to do that for a lot of years and had songs in TV and film and got to work with some really amazing musicians. But a couple of things were going on during that time that wound up changing really my life. I didn't know it at the time, of course, but one of them was that I had songs about difficult experiences in my life, like my own experience of depression or my family's history of domestic violence. And wherever we went in the world, those were always the songs that people stayed after concerts wanting to talk with me about. And they would share their own really personal stories with difficult experiences, um, kind of based on my songs, and sharing things about mental health, sharing things about abuse histories, sharing things about suicide ideation. And many of them would say that I'm the first person they had ever told about those experiences. And of course, that was a really huge honor to me. But also, I couldn't help thinking about the fact that that means if I'm the first person they'd ever told, that means they have never told a doctor or a therapist. It means they haven't told even a spouse or a partner. And I knew how important in my own healing and my own well-being that had been to be able to share those things with other people. And then even just the practical things that, like, the stuff that a physician doesn't know about you is going
Yeah,
to maybe prevent them from giving you optimal care, right? So I started to think about, like, okay, well, what is it about a music venue or about a singer or a song that makes these stories speakable for the first time? And how do we bridge the gap between what's already possible, like what's possible in a space of music and what's not yet possible elsewhere? And then alongside that, I was having just the grind and hustle of the music industry is a kind of, it's notoriously difficult
yeah.
business to be in. And I was running myself into the ground. I think the combination of the music industry with, holding space for these kinds of intense conversations night after night, which was, again, a big honor for me. But as it turns out, I didn't know how to take care of myself while also trying to hold that space. And I wound up in like catastrophic burnout and major depression. Couldn't get out of bed for weeks, let alone play concerts. And I had to just fully reimagine who I was. This is all that I ever wanted to do, right? What am I going to
Yeah.
do? Like, what is my future going to look like? Did I have a future? And in those darkest moments, the question that I kind of repeatedly came back to was this curiosity around what was happening in those music venues when people could share things that they weren't sharing elsewhere, and what did that mean for being human? Like, how can we learn from that and use that to make the world a better place? And I kind of kept pulling on the thread of that question until I wound up with a PhD in public health, specializing in how the arts affect human health and well-being.
Awesome. So how did your experience in the music industry shape your understanding of mental health and creativity?
Oh, well, I think, first of all, it's kind of like I had to go through a process as a creative, and I imagine that a lot of your listeners are creative people doing artistic things, and however they might define that for themselves, right? I imagined myself to be an incredibly creative person. But as it turns out, I only had one story that I knew how to tell about my life. It was like I knew how to be creative when it came to my artwork, when it came to my work. I didn't know how to be creative when it came to my identity, my life, my potential career paths, or even the way I imagined the way that my industry had to work and the template that I had to follow in order to succeed in it, right? As it turns out, I wasn't all that creative when it came to that kind of, um, you know, that kind of expression of creativity. And
Okay.
that had a huge impact on my mental health, like the kind of rigidity with which I held who I thought that I was and had to be, like what my work had to be and what it had to look like, et cetera. Um, and so I have this perspective just from my personal experience as far as like mental health and well-being relies on our ability to be creative, not just in the sense that like, oh, if you draw a picture or play a song every day, maybe you'll feel a little bit better. That's absolutely true. There's tons of science behind that, that can kind of like help you feel better. But in this broader sense, if you zoom out, I come at this work a lot of times with this a sense of like, what is it that we can apply creativity to that allows us to reimagine not only ourselves, but our relationships, our work, our industries, the wider world, that allows us to take collective action toward really big changes rather than accepting the world as it is and then trying to just navigate around it.
Oh yes. Yesterday I had Heather Eck, and she's an artist. She paints. She's an amazing artist, and she talked about how when she paints, she sees the colors around people, and it
Mm,
helps her. That's how she's able to see and express how that person is. And we just had a wonderful conversation, and it just goes to show you, like, yes, there's medicine out there that can help, but there's a lot of healing that people like. Music is it heals in many ways. Why don't people kind of see this? Why don't they realize that this is another way of being able to heal yourself is through either writing or
mm.
listening or creating.
Yeah, I think a lot of people realize it in the sense that we tend to do this. We kind of like self medicate with music an awful lot. Like when you're feeling down, you might kind of put on music that either lifts you back up or that reflects your own sadness back to you, kind of like either one, you know. When people want to feel motivated, they might put on a certain kind of music that helps them like get their day started. There are kind of like creative things that we might do with each other, like making a playlist for somebody that we really love, or being like, oh, if you really wanted to understand my life, you should watch this film because that film was really important to me when I was growing up, or something like that. We kind of do these things intuitively as humans as ways to express. And I'm often saying that, like, humans evolved to make and share art for a reason, right? Like it must do something essential for us. If it
Yeah.
didn't, we would have stopped doing it thousands of years ago, right? So it must be essential to us in some way. And the thing is, you don't have to understand why it's essential or like what is it doing neuroscientifically. Like there's all kinds of interesting studies around that, and you could go down really great rabbit trails around all of those things. But you don't have to know all the ins and outs of it to be able to maybe honor and appreciate that, like, oh, humans have been doing this for a long time. And one of the most obvious ways, especially from my history and from my own research in the impacts of creativity on well-being, is that humans, like the human experience is just really vast and complex and difficult. It's also rich and beautiful, but it is a lot. It is a lot. And the
Mhm.
idea that we have to squeeze our expression or our ability to understand and navigate that experience into these kind of like robot settings that we've kind of manufactured in quote unquote professional society, especially like the white Western dominant norms, right? When we try to function that way and squeeze our experience into those settings, we're gonna burn ourselves out, or we're gonna find ourselves numbed out, or just find ourselves unhappy and unsatisfied because we can't quite be who we are or tell the truth that we have to tell. So you can think about, art and creativity as something that expands our options for communication. When you're feeling something, I mean, here's a tip that I'm often giving people, like, do not expect yourself to be able to talk about everything in your life in this straightforward, linear way, like what you and I are doing right now. That's not a scientific expectation that's not based on anything real about being human. Humans need a lot of ways to express and share and just process and bear witness to the things that we're experiencing. And that's a lot of where art and creativity come in. So a lot of times the conversation is sort of like, give yourself permission to need a lot more than just the few robot settings that society tends to allow you.
So the big question is, what inspired you to pursue a PhD in public health?
Well, I didn't think that I would at first. When I stopped touring, I started a graduate program in creative writing. I had a mentor at the time who was like, I think you might like academia. It's a little bit more kind of like straightforward and predictable than the music industry is, and you might just find, a kind of like cadence in that realm that could be helpful to you. And so, on a whim, I applied for this creative writing program. I didn't think I would get in because I was a singer songwriter. I was not, a poet, for example, like a lot of my peers that wound up being in that program. But I did get in, and I had to think like, oh, am I actually going to do this? Like take 2 years off of touring? Like, what am I doing with my life? What is this? But once I started that program, I realized that I was like the one person in my cohort who really nerded out about the research. Like a lot of my fellow writers were like, oh, like I'm doing this research because I got to jump through these hoops for my degree. But for me, I was like, this is so great. How can I do more of this research? And so wound up wanting to pursue a PhD, especially to answer these questions that I had around, if it's true that humans can communicate things via the arts that we don't communicate otherwise, why?
Mhm.
And, what does that, how can we use that knowledge? What should that change about how our systems work, about how healthcare works, about how schools and workplaces work, right?
Yeah.
And when I started my PhD, it was in rhetoric and communication. I did not have any background in public health in order to even know to pursue that kind of degree. But I had also, in this intervening time, established a trauma-informed creative writing program for girls that are incarcerated. And they became my greatest teachers, saw the same things with them. Nobody will be surprised to hear like, girls share really different information in their poems and songs than they share elsewhere, right? And sometimes that information that girls are sharing in their poems was really actionable and important. It revealed maybe some reasons why they wound up in the justice system in the first place. It shared some things that they're going to need to be successful when they leave. These were really important things that nobody was paying attention to because it was in the form of poetry. So again, I was just really curious about how to advance this question of like, what's happening here and how can we use it to make the world better, to make our systems function better. So when I started my PhD, I was like, how can I keep doing this kind of program in juvenile justice in this new city that I'm in for my PhD? And as I started exploring that, I met some people who were in public health at my university, and they were like, why are you not working with us? And I was like, who are you and what do you do? So I went through a really, really fast boot camp process of a master's in public health, because of course I didn't have one, and switched my degree over to public health. And, the rest, as I say, is history.
Um, it, oh, so can you explain how your condition of synesthesia influences your artistic process?
Oh, this might be a question from somebody else because I do
Wait,
not
oh,
have
I'm
synesthesia.
sorry. I don't know why
Sometimes
my,
I wish I did. It'd be super cool.
wait a minute. See, this is my notes get mixed up. Hold on.
That's all right. That's why we have editors, right?
Yeah. No, well, I'm the editor. So yeah,
Oh,
I'm definitely the editor. But ah, okay. So okay, all right. How do you define creativity, and why do you believe it is essential for well-being?
that's such a big question, although I do love it. Defining creativity, one of the things that I get to do, I speak and consult around the world, and I'm often asking people big questions like, what is creativity to you? Also, what is well being to you? What do these words mean to you? Um, for myself, recently, I've been defining creativity as an ability to imagine otherwise. And that can be applied to lots of different things. It can be like, if you are an artist, or for me, I was a musician, I wrote songs. So in part, creativity was like the ability to imagine that a song could exist that does not exist right now, or to imagine, that that the world as it is not quite complete. It could use another song, right? So like that general ability to imagine otherwise, but that can also apply. The reason why creativity is relevant no matter what sector you're in, and no matter whether you consider yourself an artist or not, is that ability to imagine otherwise is at the root of any kind of positive change that any of us wants to make, whether that's in our personal lives, whether that's in our careers, whether that's in our politics, our societal, norms and changes that we need to make, our systems and structures. All of those changes that we might choose to ignite individually and collectively, all of those are rooted in our ability to imagine that the world could be other than what it is, right? Like James Baldwin said, the world is before you, and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in. And that impetus, that calling, that's creativity. That's what creativity ultimately is, right? And that's one of the reasons that it's so essential to well-being, because any of the things that we might do, especially at the collective level, which I'm in public health versus being an MD, right? So I'm often thinking about, what do we have to do as a community, as a collective, to make the world a place where more and more people can thrive? And that work is inherently creative. It requires us to be able to imagine that the world as it functions right now is not inevitable. This was a choice that people made over time, and we can make a different choice. We can tell a different story with the work that we're doing. And then, of course, we can get much more granular. Like creativity has a lot of positive effects on our individual health. There's so many studies showing how it can lower cortisol, like improve mood. It can also foster social connection, which we know is really important for our health and well-being. Like if you think about the reasons that you might get together with people that you love, or the reasons that you might meet new people, a lot of those occasions and reasons are things that are, fall under the umbrella of arts and culture. So these are again, essential ways that humans have connected and communicated and celebrated life and processed it for a long time.
Okay. So what oh, what led you to develop the trauma-informed creative writing program, Project Uncaged?
Yeah, I received a beautiful invitation after a show one night. Somebody came up and said, it seems like you can communicate about difficult things in your songs, like kind of readily and without a lot of like, um, ornamentation. Like you just speak frankly about your life, and yet these songs kind of make it more possible for these conversations to happen. And I work with young people in the juvenile justice system, and they, I think, would really appreciate that. So what if you came and worked with the girls in our center during this arts program that we have every year, and write with them? And this person who extended this invitation to me did not know that I had ever facilitated a creative writing workshop, although I had. She didn't know anything about me other than I was a performer, and I was able and willing to speak about real things in my life in a kind of straightforward way. So anyway, I don't have my own personal experience with justice involvement. So I spent the months between that invitation and when I first went and did that program just researching the heck out of the juvenile justice system, especially girls and gender expansive youth in the juvenile justice system, equity issues related to that, and just wanted to design a program that was as relevant and meaningful as to those young people as it could be, and something that would be responsive to their specific situations. And part of my research, I learned that there's a lot of trauma history for young people that are in the juvenile justice system, and particularly girls and gender expansive youth, LGBTQIA youth. And so I knew that I needed to learn how to create these kinds of experiences with creative writing that were also trauma informed, and that also, kept everybody safe, allowed a lot of freedom for people to share and express things that they wanted to, but no obligation to show up and reveal anything about themselves, right? How can we create a space where everybody is as free to be as expressive as they want to be, and as held in and tight-lipped as they want to be as well? How can we just create a moment where you are free to do whatever it is that you need to do in this space? And so after that first program that I did for, as a result of that invitation that I received, I just thought that was like the coolest way I've ever spent my time was with those young people. And how can I do that again? And then also because I was coming to that work from being a touring musician, I
Yeah.
couldn't stop thinking about all of that amazing work that those girls had written, how beautiful those poems were, and how many people in the world would probably love to read that work, right? And I was thinking about how far that work could go. Like, what if we could publish books of their poems and send them to mayors, to state legislators, to judges, probation officers, along with some more detail around what those people could do in their roles to make life better for these young women. So that's what I did. I established a program where we could run these creative writing programs, but also make sure that girls had a voice in juvenile justice reform, that they could have influence over the people who are making decisions around their lives by publishing their poetry and making sure that, you know, their words were put in front of people who had some power to respond and do something, you know, something to change their resources and their circumstances. And it's been, again, just they've been some of my greatest teachers and some of the most meaningful work that I've been able to do.
Amazing. So excuse me. Can you talk about the work you did the International Arts and Minor Lab at Johns Hopkins as well, and how did that contribute to the field of art and medicine?
Yeah, the International Arts and Mind Lab is a lab within the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine at Johns Hopkins University, and it is focused on exploring the intersection of arts and health, both of those things writ large, like
Yeah.
arts as expansively defined as you want it to be, health as expansively defined as you want it to be. And I was the first director of research for the International Arts and Mind Lab. We got to explore all kinds of really fascinating scientific work, especially things like, you know, the effect of music on serious mental illness, how music might be used to address and treat serious mental illness, as well as things like how does the design of our built environments affect our well-being, you know, the effects of setting on psychedelic therapies, you know, effects of literature, like young adult literature, on young people and their ability to dialogue about difficult topics like mental health or violence. Lots of really interesting intersections of arts and health, the effect of live music concerts on mental health stigma. So many different things, really wonderful to engage with that work over time. There's, you know, this field of arts and health, especially from a scientific perspective and a medical perspective, is still a little bit nascent. It's still emerging, and it's been really great to be a part of kind of leading a lot of that work over the last few years. And coming from a history as a touring musician, working a lot with the public, founding programs, I have always found it to be like my wheelhouse and my passion to marry the scientific research with like on the ground real life change. So during the time that I was director of research at that lab, I was also always kind of like out and about speaking and consulting, trying to help people, you know, bridge the research to their practice. Like, how can we use this knowledge to grow and change and enhance our work? And that aspect of my life and my work has just grown exponentially over the last few years. And so I've been glad to kind of step away from that role in academia and really step into this work of helping more communities, organizations, leaders to enhance their work using, you know, how can we use what we know about well-being and creativity to enhance our work, to grow our work, to have an even greater impact than we might have imagined. And of course, like I said, you know, bust ourselves out of our maybe preconceived ideas of like who we are and what our work has to look like, and, you know, the lanes that we think we have to stay in. How can we jiggle that loose a bit?
Awesome. So can you discuss your book, The Arts of Prescription, and its significance on U.S. communities?
Yes. Oh, this is kind of exciting for me because a lot of people, especially when I get to come on brilliant podcasts like yours with lots of like people who are thinking about like, like what is my, you know, how do I develop my my personal life, like my goals and things like that.
Yeah.
A lot of times in my work, arts on prescription is sort of like, yeah, we've been talking about that for a while. But when I get to talk with audiences like yours, it's kind of like, wait, what are we talking about? What's arts on prescription? And that's really fun for me. Um, the document is called Arts on Prescription, a field guide for US communities. And it is exactly what it sounds like. There are people, physicians, counselors, therapists, school counselors, even social workers in the US right now who are prescribing arts and cultural experiences, nature experiences to their patients and clients in order to benefit their health. And this is based on a kind of like a long-term program started in the UK, happening in other countries for decades at this point, called social prescribing. And it's called social prescribing because it's kind of hinting at the idea that there are things in people's social lives and in society that people might need in order to be well. Like, it's not just like you can go to a clinic and that's going to solve all of your problems. You might need some medicine, but aside from that, you might need housing assistance. You might need to meet people who can, like, provide friendship and care for you. You might want to volunteer and meet people with like-minded values. You might need exercise and recreation in your community, all those kinds of things. In the US, we have had what we call like community referral or non-medical referral. Like, most of you, your physicians, for various patients, they can refer those patients to things in the community that somebody might need, like support groups or housing assistance, like I mentioned. But we certainly haven't had as extensive a menu of options here in the US as these other countries have had. So, this program, Arts and Prescription, is a concept of kind of filling that gap. Like, how can we look at what other countries are doing and respond to that in a way that might be, not might be, that would be relevant for communities here in the US. But then also, how can we think about how to tap into our existing assets? Like, we know that there's hundreds, thousands of studies at this point showing the different ways that, like, arts experiences, cultural experiences, nature experiences, views of nature can benefit our health. Why are we not tapping into that as part of our healthcare? These are existing assets in our communities, and especially as you see people trying to come to terms with a mental health crisis, with a loneliness epidemic, there is increasing will and interest in, like, okay, how are we going to respond to this? We're not going to be able to get solutions doing the same things that we've done. We need some other approach. And to the extent that we have assets right here in front of us that we're not tapping into, that's bananas. we gotta change that up. And Arts and Prescription is one way to change that up. It is a way to formalize that link between arts engagement, nature engagement, and health by giving physicians, other kinds of healthcare providers, social care providers, ways to formally link their patients and clients to experiences in the community that can benefit their health. And when you get a prescription for those experiences, it is typically free. So we're seeing these pilots. Massachusetts had the first statewide Arts on Prescription program that they launched in 2020. And we've seen lots of other pilots popping up in communities around the country, including really recently, Stanford University has a university version of it where students who might be seeking mental health support from the Student Health Center can be referred to university-based arts experiences as well for their well-being.
So how do you balance your scientific research with your creative pursuits?
I feel like they are very much the same. Recently somebody asked me, Tasha, you're really busy with some research and consulting. Like, what do you do to keep up your creative practice? And I was interested in their question at the time because I was like, oh, that is my creative practice. And so I do still, sit down at the piano and play. I do still write songs, but I also have always felt that the work of entrepreneurship and also, when I was in music, I felt like the business aspect of it was incredibly creative and interesting.
Yeah.
And I feel like that also about research, about science, about even consulting, like, oh, this is such a creative process of figuring out where are we going? What's the question? How do we pull on this thread? And so blending the two, I think a lot of that comes down to making sure that my creativity is infused with some of like what I've learned as a scientist as far as how to ask questions and stay really open, without any agenda to where that question might take me. That's a really cool frame of mind to bring into your work as an artist. And then, of course, from the other direction, making sure that my science is infused with my knowing and my practices as a creative, which means, thinking beyond what, somebody might be saying, like, here's the research question, here's how we have to attack it. And I'm kind of like, oh, I don't think so. I think there's probably 1,000 different ways to go at this, all of them rigorous, all of them going to get us an answer that we need. But there's way more ways to think about it. And I love that work with my clients as well, because sometimes, especially creative people in creative professions, they, if you're going to tell them that you wanted to study, for example, the effects of their work on well-being, they're kind of like, oh man, this is going to get all like quantified and reductive, and I don't want to work with scientists on my work. It's going to make it seem like it's much colder and smaller than it is. And one of the delightful things about my work is getting to come in and be like, oh no, you can approach the science of what you do, the study of what you do, with just as much creativity as you approach the thing that it is that you do. This is all of a piece. And bringing these two things together feels far more human as well, all the way around.
Okay. Um, so how can healthcare professionals integrate creative practices into the treatment plans?
I think a lot of healthcare providers already do this in some ways. Like, we've been always thrilled to hear from healthcare providers who are themselves artists or musicians of some kind. And they kind of have an intuitive knowing when they're with their patients, like, oh, I wonder if XYZ might benefit you. The thing is that they don't have a formal way to make that recommendation. The best they might be able to do is to give some advice. And then beyond that, for healthcare providers who aren't already making some recommendations or giving this kind of advice, the idea of trying to learn about all of the possible things that human beings might be able to do artistically, culturally, in nature that could benefit their health, that is too much. Like, providers are already like, they're really busy. So I wouldn't want providers to think that, like, oh, okay, you basically have to go get a whole degree in how arts affects human health so that you can know how to refer people. So the Arts of Prescription program, as an example, is a kind of system where the way that we've seen it set up, there's many different ways it can work, actually. But a couple of the ways that we've seen work really well is a physician, for example, might register that, like, their patient is dealing with, for example, loneliness or just a poor quality of life, or maybe they're kind of isolated, they're not really leaving their house, and they might think, like, this person could probably use something in the community that could draw them out, that could feel meaningful, etc. And so they would refer that person to either, like, what people call a link worker or a care coordinator, and then that person would talk with the patient and kind of find out what things are interesting to them, and then link that person with something in their community. So there's kind of like a bridge there that can help people find what they need. And then another version that we've seen work really well is that there is just kind of like a menu of options that a provider has. Like, there's maybe 5 arts or cultural programs in the community that provider is linked to, and they can kind of tell their patient, like, hey, of these 5 things, is there one of these that's most interesting to you? And we've seen providers use this in a whole bunch of different ways. Like, we heard from pediatricians who were using, tickets to the museum to help, a family that wasn't talking with their teenager very much. And, like, what if you went to the museum, nobody's on their screen for a couple hours, and then you have this novel experience that you can kind of like debrief about and talk to each other about. We've seen mental health therapists use these kinds of things of, like, if you go to this play or if you go to the park for a hike, like, come back next week in our session and talk about what you experience and how that might relate to some of these issues that we've been working through. So lots of creative uses of this kind of work by physicians, by therapists, by school counselors. So I would say, if there are any healthcare providers listening, we have done a whole bunch of work, especially with this field guide and with lots of other work around the country, to make it as easy for healthcare providers to start doing this work as possible, so that you don't have to learn a whole bunch of new things or kind of like feel like you're taking on a whole other form of care. It's actually pretty easy and intuitive to start it up.
So what advice do you have for artists experiencing burnout or mental health challenges?
Mm, I care so much about this issue, obviously, because of my life and how
Yes.
it derailed my career. And, after I was out of my music career, I remember I signed up to volunteer for a kind of like community social service. And as part of that, I had to take a training in trauma informed practice. I had no idea what that was beforehand. But I remember sitting in that training and being like, I wish I had known all of this stuff when I was a singer songwriter. Like, there was this sense I had sitting in that first training that like artists are just supposed to magically know how to deal with difficult things in life as if we have magic powers. And like, listen, for for millennia, artists have been healers in
Yes.
communities. Like we do have some kind of intuitive sense of, you know, how to speak truth to power or how to find other ways, kind of find creative ways to process and express the human experience, and that deeply matters. But that doesn't mean that artists don't need and deserve, you know,
Yeah.
training and support for this kind of like role that we play in our communities. So I developed a training in mental health and trauma informed practice design specifically for people in creative professions. Like, how can I, you know, basically give you the training that I wish I would have had, that is really malleable to whatever your unique work is? Because, you know, we are all out here doing really different things that are grounded in our unique perspectives and artistic take on the world. So, but how can we make sure that you have some preparation and some training that gives you more confidence in your work, helps you to know what you don't know, a little bit more about what you don't know, right? And helps you know when and how to refer somebody to additional help. So I would say that first, that, you know, it doesn't have to be my training, but just the reminder that you do need and deserve support for the work that you do and for the role that you play. And there shouldn't be some kind of expectation that you can just magically handle it. And I think that's often put on artists. So, main tip, you do need and deserve that help, just as anybody else would. And the second thing I would say is to hold the door open for other expressions of the work that you do. Like I said at the beginning, like I had kind of one story that I knew how to tell about my life, and my artistry and my identity had to come out and like manifest in a really particular way, or I would have thought that I was a failure, you know, down to as specific as I have to be making money from my music. I have to be making a living from my music, not even just money. I have to be making a living from my music, or I'm not really a musician. I had this really rigid idea, and that I only applied for myself. I would have never said that about other artists, right? But I think that that rigidity and that one limited conception of what my artistry had to look like is ultimately what burned me out. You know, the combination of that with the grind of the industry. Um, but certainly, if I had been able, if I had had some support to be more imaginative about how I could be tackling my career, that might not have happened, right? So, oh, and let me just throw this in as well, that the thing that you do to make sense of life, if that's art, if you also make money from that thing, that is always going to cause some tension. And that's okay. It's not right or wrong. It's not bad or good. But as long as you can give yourself some space around that, that like, if the thing that I'm doing to process life when it's difficult is the exact same thing that I need to keep doing in order to make money and pay my rent, oh boy, that's going to cause some, there's going to be some times when those two things are in conflict with each other. And if we can have some grace for ourselves and compassion for ourselves for when that happens, and maybe some other options for what we want to do to cope, if we can't use the thing that we make money from, that can be a really big help.
Yeah. For me, it's podcasting, and then
Yeah.
cooking and cooking. Those are my two releases. I really do enjoy cooking, and podcasting has really helped me find my purpose. I was 44 years old, furloughed from my
Mm.
job, didn't have anything. I had a honey to do list out the door because I was home and she still had to work, and so I was like, no, I need to find something that's gonna be creative for me, that I need to. And I had been wanting to start a podcast, and so I made up so many excuses
Mm.
for why I shouldn't start my podcast. It was, oh, who's gonna listen to me? My voice is horrible. I'm gonna suck. I'm not gonna.
Mm.
Every excuse in the book, I was just, until I finally decided to press record, 5 minutes wasn't nothing serious, wasn't that long, but that was what got me over the hump. That's what made me, you know what, like I can do this. Once I recorded it, it became much easier. Next time it was 7 minutes. The next time it grew to 12 minutes until the point where, all right, I was like, because at first it was me discussing everything that was going wrong in 2020.
Mm.
Uh, it was just focusing on the negative aspects, talking, ranting about the news, the election, and the George Floyd situation.
Mm.
And I was like, all right, the topics suck. I'm not enjoying the topics. So I decided to switch it up and interview people. And I was interviewing all types of people. I was artists, musicians, friends. You if you wanted to get interviewed, I was interviewing you.
Mm.
That's how it started. That's how it started for me. And once I saw that people were reacting to the interviews, people were actually enjoying hearing other people's stories and seeing how they've turned, or if they had an interesting story where they turned their life around, whatever.
Mm.
And just even some of the ones I had one with a friend of mine. He's a highly successful real estate agent and real estate broker in Brooklyn, and we had a wonderful conversation. A friend of ours from high school heard the interview, and she had been on the fence about starting a business and all that. And she heard our conversation about manifestation, goal setting, growth
Mm.
mindset, developments, all the things that I'm talking about now. And she's like, these are two guys that I grew up with that I know personally. They're talking about all these things and talking about making themselves uncomfortable and taking that leap.
Mm.
And she says, I know them. If they can do it, I can do this. And she took that leap, started her business, and sent me a message a few months later, like, yo, I listened to this episode from my husband, and you and Jason was just talking about all these things. And I just want to let you know, thank you.
Mm.
I needed to hear that episode to get over this hump. And that to me was amazing. To me, it was
Mm.
like, okay, I'm doing something correct. I'm doing something right. And so that's when I kind of started really focusing more on now. I want to have coaches on, I want to have entrepreneurs, I want to have artists on, because everyone has fascinating stories and amazing stories, and people go through things in life. And if they can come and share their story, and and other people, it might not be the same story, but they can see like, hey, this is a regular person like me. They just they're struggling. They've been through something in life, and look at them. They're picking themselves up. Like you said, you burned out, and you were able to pick yourself up, and now you're serving the public. You're helping.
Mm.
You're helping change people's lives. These young ladies, you're reaching out with your program and helping them. It's a much more greater feeling when you're servicing, when it's in service.
Yeah. And those platforms that we find as like humans, like there's the platform maybe of the stage for a performer, like what I was, there's a platform of a podcast, there's a platform of an exhibit if you're a visual artist. But sometimes we need those like platforms of people sharing something that they've been through for, like for us to be, it ignites something for somebody who's listening or seeing or watching, like exactly like you said, that you had to be able, as a creative, you had to be able to what I would say, imagine otherwise. Imagine that there's a podcast that could exist, that could have your voice, that could share a different perspective. But because you followed that thread, that path of imagining that and in creating it, taking action on that idea, then there are other people who can encounter that platform that you've created, hear those ideas, and for themselves imagine otherwise, right? And these kinds of things can ripple out. And that's really the core of creativity for me. What I get most excited about is like people finding ways to get creative about who we think we are, you know, to the point of your title, like stuck in my mind, like in what ways am I stuck? How can I get more creative? How can I hold the door open for the possibility that the way that it looks right now is not the way that it has to look. You know, nothing is as it must be, right?
Mhm.
And when we can find ways for ourselves to express that, we often, as you said, make possible, make opportunities, make windows of opportunity for somebody else to discover something like that for themselves as well. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's beautiful.
Awesome. This has been a great conversation. So, did we discuss how we human?
Oh, well, I didn't name the title of it, but I mentioned that I have a training in mental health and trauma informed practice for creative professionals.
So,
And
is that the title of it?
yeah, how we human.
Okay. Can you explain that a little something for us? For
Yeah, sometimes you know, I guess the poet in me or whatever is kind of thinking about like, you know, human as a verb. I'm also neurodivergent and I often, you know, have found myself telling whether it's a therapist or a coach in my life, like I feel like I'm not good at doing the human thing. Like I'm trying to figure out how to be a person. And so as a scientist, it's been really interesting for me to kind of see how I can peel the layers back on what it is that makes us tick as creatures basically living in this world, right? Like how is it that we human? And as it turns out, one of those ways that we human is, you know, being creative, is finding more ways to express our lives, that life can be both amazing and both incredibly and also incredibly difficult, and we need ways to express both of those things, or we find ourselves numbed out or frozen or worse, right? um, and you know, it turns out that part of how we human is connecting with other people, figuring out ways to have our truth reflected back to us, to be pushed beyond our existing boundaries. These are some ways that we human also. And then, you know, some of how we human has to do with the reactions and the responses that we have to difficulty in our lives. Sometimes that means that we go through something and that results in psychological trauma that then affects our well-being for a long time after, or requires some kind of healing process, right? Also grief is part of how we human. So as I kind of like was taking this lens of learning about mental health, of learning about public health, how our systems get entrenched, right, and how we change those things up, that also became a theme of my training in mental health and trauma informed practice, that this is not about the work of learning how to be trauma informed, for example, is not just about like, oh, how can I identify somebody else, quote unquote, out there who has a problem and then make sure that I can support them or I don't trigger them or whatever. But understanding that all of us benefit when we find ways to make more space for our humanity, that the things that we do for people who might have experienced trauma actually benefit all of us. So there doesn't have to be a line between how do I identify who in my program or my school or my workplace might have trauma so that I can respond to them in some kind of particular way. But like, no, how do we learn how to respond to the humanity of all of us in a safe way, an accommodating way, a responsive way, a creative way, so that regardless of who we're working with, we are able to connect and cultivate safe spaces for each other. So yeah, how we human. It's a professional development training in mental health and trauma informed practice.
amazing. Um, One final question: how do you see the future of the arts and medicine evolving?
Oh, you know, what I've been excited about when it comes to arts in medicine, arts in health, arts in healthcare, arts in public health, and then also, of course, this idea of arts on prescription. What makes me excited about that is that to me, it's evidence that even our most complex systems, like our healthcare systems in the US, even our most complex systems can be reimagined. And we can think of other ways to approach even the things that we thought like, oh, this is really complex. It has to work in this kind of like specific certain way. It really doesn't. You know, back to that James Baldwin quote, like, you know, you need not take or leave this as it was when you came in. So when I think about the future of integrating arts with healthcare, what I think about oftentimes is how do we integrate more of our humanity, more of how we human into our systems. So that can be our healthcare systems, also our political systems, our justice systems. How do we get more imaginative about around what it would mean to show up in those systems fully human, and also to be tapping into our strengths and assets as a collective. And that means that we don't pretend, for example, that you can walk into any given space and leave your humanity. You have to leave your humanity behind that door. That, like, of course, when you show up at a doctor's office, you are still a human being who not only needs maybe some medication or some rehabilitation with a physical therapist, but you're also somebody who needs social connection. You're somebody who needs to feel like your life has meaning and purpose. And of course, that's part of, the WHO, the World Health Organization, defines health as a state of complete mental, physical, and social well-being. That's a really high bar, right? Complete well-being. And they said not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So you can think about health as two things, both complete well-being and that absence of suffering, absence of pain, absence of injury, et cetera, that we usually associate with health. And so, yeah, in the future, I'm looking forward to people being more imaginative and creative around how we rehumanize our systems, how we reimagine them. Don't accept it. Nothing has to be stuck, right? And also, how do we cultivate communities where more and more people can not only not be sick, but be fully well? That's the real goal.
Um, excuse me, Tasha. It's been wonderful time having you on the show. Now is the time where you get the solo screen, you get the plug away, let everybody know where they can find you, websites, everything.
Ah, well, thank you so much. I would love to work with you. I work with I speak and consult around the world for events of all kinds and organizations, from international corporations to local agencies. Would love to connect. I made a custom website for listeners of the show. It's just tashagolden.com/stuck in my mind. So tashagolden.com/stuck in my mind. And you can come there to get a few free resources and ways to work with me. Would love to connect.
And that will be in the descriptions of the show notes and everything. Um, Thank you so much for being a guest. Um, we got it. Finally got it scheduled. Because I usually because I do a live show Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday,
Oh,
and
wow.
I am booked through November. But
Amazing.
I didn't want to. I didn't want to wait to record with you. I wanted to work with you and record with you earlier, and I will be releasing it probably sometime this week. But yeah, I, it was wonderful to have you on the show. I'm excited. It was good to really have hear what you're doing and just the effect that you're having out there, being creative and helping people. It's some. I love that. I love that fact of that, and I just love to celebrate people like yourself and have
Mhm.
people like you come on who are doing these amazing things. And so, thank you,
Oh,
thank you for
that's
what you're
so
doing.
kind. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. It really was. But don't leave just yet. Let me close out the show and we'll chat a little bit. Maybe one day we can get you on live as well. So,
No,
eh,
nice.
so, and I just started a radio. I started a radio show too. So, but yeah. Hold on one second. All right, everybody. Thank you for everybody who's gonna catch this when I air it. Appreciate you for tuning in. If you haven't subscribe, share. Definitely follow Tasha. Everything will be in the show notes. Um, Shout out to my real wise fan, Poppy J, Brandy J. Love you guys. Uh, Boss Lady, appreciate you and everything you do. And as always, big shout out to all the essential workers out there. God bless you. Be safe. You know your boy Wise does it. Peace out.